an absolutely incredible event. And I'm sad to say that this is going to be the final one of these, but still, I'm looking forward to it because this is time for your round 13 rapid recap, Fiona. And the game that we chose today is the battle between Sergey Karjakin and Vidit, which and there were many battles this game, this final round. The players didn't just come out just to make quick draws. We had a lot of amazing fights, and this was one of them. This started off as a 4 knights Scotch.
Quite a rare guest at the top level. We were thinking on move 3, what is it going to be, an Italian game, a Ruy Lopez? But no, we were happy to see not a real 4 knights Scotch, which leads to fresher positions. And Vidit striking in the center with d5, and here Karjakin sprung the first surprise.
Yeah, here Magnus surprised Mamedyarov, and Grandelius here did have a novelty against Dubov in the tournament sponsored by Karjakin. I remember Pragnananda had this in one of his games. I gotta have a little bit of fun. Now here, the main move is e takes d5, and after c takes d5 castles, this is the old school line. But Sergey going for something quite rare, bishop d2. This has been played a couple of times in recent years. And the point is that this essentially, this doesn't force simplifications, but it invites a bunch of simplifications right into an endgame where white is absolutely not risking. And Sergey made it clear in the interview that he did not plan on taking any risk this game. He was more or less fine with a draw. But, Fiona, he wanted to test Vidit just a little bit, and that is why he declined to draw right around the 10th move. He wanted Vidit to prove that he could actually fully equalize. So here we go, the simplification.
So the start of the simplifications here, bishop takes, f6, queen takes, we see an exchange on e4, takes on b2, takes on c6, takes, rook b8, and queens and rook get traded off as well. And we ended up in this position where we thought we're probably just headed for a quick draw here.
Yeah, I mean, this looks basically totally symmetrical, maybe a tiny bit of an edge for white because of the superior placement of the bishop and the fact that white has a tempo. Sergey brings the bishop back in order to defend the d1 square. But Vidit did everything right. He brought his king in, got his rook to e8, threatening checkmate. And after h4, this is the moment when things started veering off course just a little bit for Vidit. The simplest path to a draw was the move bishop f5. Now, the reason he rejected it was probably because of rook b7. And well, after bishop c2, rook c7, it looks like he loses a pawn, and he does. But the move he might have underestimated is bishop e4. If white takes the bishop, then after rook takes e4, the h4 pawn is hanging, and that's an immediate draw. If rook takes a7, then after bishop takes f3, g takes f3. The thing is, with this pawn structure being as incredibly damaged as it is, white has 0 winning chances. This is well known, and Vidit certainly knows that. But there was something in this line that he didn't like, or he was attracted by the look of bishop a6. But whatever it was, things started getting just a smidge more complicated for Vidit right about here.
And you're really emphasizing the importance of you have to be precise from the get-go. It's easy to underestimate that kind of decision. You're only on move 18, equal material, symmetrical pawn structure. But as you say, once Vidit played bishop a6, immediately Sergey putting on the pressure and starting to ask some questions. How are you going to defend the pawn on c7? Then piling up the pressure on the a file.
And on the rook, he's asking a lot of questions that you don't have easy answers. Sergey activating his pieces. Vidit doing a good job of deflecting all of the attacks, but after bishop b3, it's a very uncomfortable position all of a sudden for Vidit, who can't move his bishop. The bishop on a6 is paralyzed because behind the bishop sits a very weak pawn on a7. Vidit does his best. He goes c5, trying to shut down white's bishop. Sergey says, no. You're not going c4. He prevents that. And now we have a quieter stage of the game where both players try to improve the position of their pieces. Sergey going f3, preparing to bring his king out. After rook d6, a very impressive decision. Anish Giri was in the studio at the time, and he was impressed with c4. This looks like a very committal move, Fiona. It closes the bishop, but it fixes the weak pawn on c5, which enables white to attack it with the rook in the future. You can't really do this immediately because, of course, you allow c4. And this is exactly what Sergey does. After king a7, he plays rook a5. And this was really the most important moment of the whole game. And Fiona, we talked about how Vidit's losses in the previous rounds perhaps, really discouraged him. And in another set of circumstances, he might have found the drawing path, which started with the move rook c6. You have to defend that pawn.
Yeah, this really a crucial moment here. We talked about it plenty. Rook c6, the only way to defend the pawn. And here, well, we looked at the line after rook b6. The rook has to keep defending the bishop. And rook b4.
b4, this is a very important move, attacking the bishop and the pawn. The bishop drops back to b3. And now up comes the king, king d6. The rook has to give a check, otherwise you lose c4. And if you go rook a5 here, then after bishop takes c4, it's very important to point out, this is a really cool line. Rook takes a7, rook takes h4, rook takes f7. This is not an easy draw under normal circumstances, but black has the brilliant rook a4, and now not rook takes a2, because you lose the second pawn to a screw. But first you go king e6. The pawn on a2 is defenseless, and this is a very easy draw, 2-on-1 on one side of the board. So this was the drawing line. After rook d5 check instead of rook a5, king moves to the side to c6, and white will not be able to sustain the c4 pawn in the long run. So this really was the last moment at which Vidit had a very clear-cut path toward a draw. But, and let me just fast forward here.
Yeah,
but Vidit...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that king d8 really is a sign of frustration. He just sort of abandoned hopes in this position.
Yeah, it's not clear, of course, to us what he missed in the other line. There must be something down the line. It was a long variation, but I think, as you pointed out, the results from the last couple of games, yesterday's very tough loss against Shakhmamyarov surely had something to do with it. And, well, now Sergey Karjakin picking up a pawn and bringing out the king, starting to activate all the pieces, and his technique, Dania, was a sight to behold.
Exquisite, and it started with h5. This is a great move. It provokes further weaknesses. If you go g5, you're going to have a massive weakness on h6, which white can attack with rook c6. Vidit didn't do that, but the pawn trade really softens up. It softens up black's king side pawns. Now Sergey getting his king a lot closer to the center and getting it right into the center. He plays g4 in order to fix black's pawns in place. The pawn on f3 is a little bit of a weakness, but it's easy to defend. It can be defended with the bishop, with the king, and it really was not a problem. And here, it's a healthy pawn up. Sergey moves his rook aside in order to pave the way for the pawn. And the next critical moment, he goes bishop d1. There's that move to defend f3. Rook d6 check, by the way, does not win the bishop because of rook d5 with a winning bishop endgame. And Vidit, maybe he could have defended more resiliently, but Fiona, he ends up playing bishop b7, and this accelerates his demise. Sergey immediately pounces.
Bishop b7 relinquishes the control of the square on f5. And the problem is that after rook f5, which is the move that Sergey played, you cannot avoid the rook trade. Of course, Sergey had to evaluate this bishop ending with the extra pawn. Is it enough? But Dania, the trousers came into full force.
Indeed, that's a Russian chess term for basically two pawns on either side of the board that cannot be stopped, that overwhelm the opposing forces. Usually it means it's referred to in a pawn endgame, but even though black has a bishop, that bishop does not constitute a sufficient force. Black's only passed pawn is very easily restrained by white's king, and that's exactly what happens. First, Sergey brings his bishop to e4, forcing black's bishop back. Here comes the c-pawn. Here comes the c-pawn. The point is that after king d6, f6, this is the classic trousers. These pawns are too overwhelming. And if you play bishop e6, whoop, bishop, oh no, sorry, not bishop f5. My bad, that's a different line. You go f7, bishop f7, c8, queen. If king e6, then it's time for bishop f5 check, distracting the king. If you take the pawn, then you lose the bishop, and white makes another queen. So that's not possible. Vidit basically has to tread water. And all that Sergey had to do was to figure out the right configuration of pieces that would allow him to restrain the h-pawn and then walk the king all the way toward the bishop. But first, he, of course, had to figure out a way to restrain his h-pawn, and that meant remaneuvering his bishop from e4, Fiona.
Yeah, we thought that he was going to go for a plan with f4, but here he decided he had a change of heart. He brought the bishop around to d3, to f1, and finally to h3, from where the bishop is now defending the pawn on f5. There is nothing left for Vidit to do here. He can only wait, and that gives Sergey Karjakin enough time to simply walk his king all the way over to the queen side.
Indeed, one more attempt to complicate matters by Vidit. King f7, tempting Sergey into f6. Then Black had the idea of going h3 and h2. White is still completely winning here after bishop b6, but there's no need for these complications. Sergey just going king b6, and Vidit resigned. The king's march to b8, followed by promotion, is simply unstoppable. And what an exquisite technical effort by Sergey, who would have guessed that the game would not have ended in a draw after the opening? And yet that is the nature of these players. They are able to squeeze blood from a stone. They can make something out of nothing time and time again. And this was a great example of it. A very painful tournament and a very painful ending for Vidit, but a great recovery for Sergey, who himself had a painful loss yesterday against Sam Shankland.
Absolutely. Kudos to Sergey Karjakin. Exquisite technique indeed. This was your rapid recap of round 13. Hope you enjoyed that. And Dania, well, last look at our final round results, which was a lot more bloody than I had anticipated.
Indeed, we had a lot of players coming out ready to play Mamedyarov Caruana. Not among them. They made a quick draw. Rapport and Giri made a quick draw, and it was great having Anisha in the studio. Gridelius Duda, but everybody else, including Gridelius Duda, which happened to end in a draw, but what a draw it was. They were out there in order to play. Jordan scoring a win. Prague scoring a last round win against Andrei Yesipenko, who was devastated, but what a comeback by Prague. What resilience. Of course, Magnus winning by forfeit. He wins the tournament. And Karjakin, as we just described, defeating.
Indeed, and there we see the final standings. Magnus Carlsen, winner of the 2022 Tata Steel Chess, with a great score of 9.5 out of 13. In shared second and third place, we find Shahriar Mamedyarov and Richard Rapport, both of whom had really tremendous performances here. Then behind that, Anish on 7.5, Karjakin with his last round win, as well as Jordan finishing on +1. Fabiano not been his tournament. Yesipenko is also going to struggle with his last round loss. Then Duda also not the tournament he was hoping for. Vidit, probably one of the biggest disappointments for him it will have been after the early lead. And so on and so forth. I wasn't planning to read out every single name on that list. Dania,
I think that was very well described. Well, all of the players, I think, no, you're right. All of the players had their own arcs. They had their own tournament experiences. And even though they didn't all score 9.5 out of 13, they all had a fantastic run. And we congratulate very heartily the world champion Magnus Carlsen for winning the Masters. And, of course, Arjun Erigaisi for winning the Tata Steel Challenges. We expect great things from him in the future. And we expect great things from the chess calendar in the near future. And that will be heralded by the Chess.com Rapid Chess Championship, which is a brand new world-class online event series for the top 100 players, top 10 women, and top 10 juniors in the world. Watch as the very best compete for their share of $20K each week, culminating with a $150,000 prize final. If you're experiencing already a little bit of chess withdrawal as the Tata Steel comes to an end, well, don't, because it all starts at 9 a.m. Pacific so very soon, Saturday, February the 12th, right here on Chess.com, and every weekend thereafter. This is a very exciting new event. And for more information on it, head on over to go.chess.com/RCC, the Rapid Chess Championship, coming your way early in February.
So much chess action to look forward to. No rest for the wicked. The Grand Prix gets underway in just a few days, then the Rapid Chess Championship. But for us, it is time now to wrap up this 2022 Tata Steel Chess Tournament coverage. Dania, first of all, a huge thank you to you. It's been an absolute pleasure commentating alongside you. Big shout out, of course, to our producer, Big, manning the ship here behind the scenes. A huge thank you To all of you guys watching us at home, keeping us company, big shout out to the team here. Of course, difficult circumstances to run a tournament in the middle of a pandemic. So huge shout out to everyone who made this tournament possible. So many people working so hard behind the scenes. And yeah, that is it for me. Dania, I'll let you finish the show.
Well, I echo everything you just said. I'm so very grateful that I get to do what I love. I get to wake up maybe a little bit earlier than I would have liked, but I get to do what I would have done anyway. But I'm even more grateful that I can do it with such an amazing supporting cast, including an amazing co-commentator. It's been such a pleasure covering Tata Steel with you, Fiona. This is a marathon event. We did it, and I just hope that everybody enjoyed the coverage and everybody enjoyed the magical atmosphere of this one-of-a-kind tournament. I'm sad it's over, but I'm going to get some sleep tomorrow and on to so many other exciting tournaments. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you to everybody for watching, and to Bigfoot for the absolute heroic camera work and production work as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dania. Shout out as well to Robert Hess, who was here for the first part of the tournament. That concludes our coverage. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one, and we'll see you soon.